Welcome, welcome. So glad everybody's with us this morning. Welcome to our Sunday morning broadcast of Covenant Community Fellowship. We are Kingdom Focused Ministry where families come first. So we're so glad to have you with us this morning. Wow. We've got a great message for you, and we are excited that you are here with us. So I thank God for you. And so we'll get started here in a minute, bringing on a couple more platforms. Thank God for you. For those of you that are just joining us, good morning. See your thumbs up. Hello there. So glad that you joined us this morning. Good morning. Good morning. I remember hearing Martin King preach a message, the man that God called or that Christ called a fool. And I was like, whoa. I know that was not the case, that there was someone who Christ called a fool, right? And actually there was. And we'll take a look at it. Sandra, good morning to you. So good to see you, Lady T. So good to see you. And just glad that you are here with us. Amen. Amen. This is a day that the Lord has made. We choose to rejoice and be glad in it. A couple more platforms coming on, so thank God for you joining us. Good morning, Covenant Community Fellowship. Good morning, our friends and our family. We are so glad to have you with us. So we thank God for you. It's a bright, sunshiny day here in the Magic City. So glad that you are here with us. People have come from out of town to be here with us this morning and this weekend with the Magic City Classic. And so we are so glad that you have joined us and that you are here. Wow, what a message. A life worth living. A life worth living. Man, now that right there is an amazing call. A life worth living. Over the last 20 years, I've spent time with leaders, and the last 12 years of pastoring, I've spent time with individuals and families. And it seems that people are in search of a moment. In other words, that they are living their life in search of a moment to recreate to where they have some joy that they cannot seem to reclaim. It is the same thing when I talk to former addicts. They said that there's something about that first high, and that when they get that first high, they want it again, and they spend the rest of their time in search of that next high. Man, can you imagine that you are spending your time in search of that next high? And every time they say that they take their drug of choice, every time the high is a little less than what it was before. So they think of a little bit more drug to get that. And if we are living our lives looking for moments, these great times, these great gatherings, then we are missing so much in life, because we cannot chase a moment. We cannot chase a high from a transactional relationship, from a family reunion, from a family gathering. We cannot live from high to high. We have to live in the totality of a life. In Luke chapter 12, we're going to look at a man who was very successful. All of us want to be successful. We're going to look at Luke chapter 12, verses 13 through 21. For many of us, that search for a high, it begins when we are coming out of high school. Do something, make something out of your life. You want the house, the cars, the good job with the good retirement. You want to save some money. You want the 401k. You want all of those wonderful things. And we spend so much time doing and so little time being. So if you have your Bibles, if you would, turn to Luke chapter 12. We're going to look at verses 13 through 21. I'm asking the Holy Spirit to open up the eyes of our understanding so that we can see this text right here and what God is saying in it. The parable of the rich fool is what we put in there. Someone in the crowd said, verse 13, to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." But he said to him, Man, who made me a judge or an arbitrator over you? And he said to them, Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness. For one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. And he told them a parable, saying, The land of a rich man produced plentifully. And he thought to himself, What shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops. And he said, I will do this. I will tear down my old barns, and I will build larger barns. And there I will store all of my grain and all of my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry. Wow. But God said to him, Fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich towards God. Wow. So is the one that lays up treasures for himself, herself, instead of the riches of God. There's this peace that is within us that we want to be self-confident. We want to be self-assured. We want to say that we have provided all that we need to live the good life and to finish well. And so at some point in our life, we began the pursuit of getting all we can and canning all that we got. And so we began to say that, we've got to have more things. We've got to have the house. We've got to have the luxury vehicle. We've got to have the land. We've got to have the right vacations. We've got to do this right. Our 401k has to be stacked. Our stock options have to be stacked. But at some point, we are going to have an appointment with death. Now, I'm not saying this because we are getting older and that we should become morbid and fearful about life. But instead of becoming fearful, what I am saying is that we have to realize that the days that we are living are fleeting, that time waits for no one, that we cannot save time. We can only spend it. At some point, we will be at the end of our life, and what are the things that really matter? What are the things that you're going to try to hold on to when you are on your deathbed? I love the story here because it reminds us that we can get so caught up. We can get so caught up looking for things that we began to love things and use people instead of using things and loving people. Here in this parable, here in this situation that Yeshua, Jesus the Christ, finds himself in, here they are with the Messiah, and all they can think about is how I can get more stuff out of my brother, how I can gather more belongings, how I can get my brother to divide his inheritance with me now while he is yet alive, a prodigal son complex. Jesus says, who made me the arbitrator over stuff? And then he looks at everybody else while he's talking and responding to this individual, and he says, guard yourself against all covetousness. Now, this is spreading out a little further, not just money, but things and stuff and people, coveting what your neighbor has, desiring. The word that comes to mind here is envy, becoming envious. And we use that word jealousy and envious wrong. Most people aren't jealous of you because you don't want what they have. They are envious of you because they want what you have. When people want what you have, they are not jealous of you, they are envious of you. And they then began to covet what you have. When we covet what others have, we take no value and note of what we already have. We declare that what God has given us for this day at this time in our life, it is not enough. That the Most High God has divided everything up and it is not enough. I want more. I need more. Today, not tomorrow, but today. So he tells them in verse 16, in Luke chapter 12 and verse 16, he tells them the parable of the land of the rich man that produced plentifully, that the business was up and going, the schemes are up and going. We have residual income coming from different places. We have retirement and 401k and Social Security, and we have all these different things coming in. We're doing quite well. In verse 17, he says that the man thought to himself, what shall I do? For I have nowhere else to store the abundance of what I have. It's interesting that he thought to himself that he did not consult with God. He did not consult with his brothers and sisters in the Lord. He did not go to the community leaders. He did not go to the church. He did not go to those that were laboring in the vineyard to help the poor and the hurting. He just thought to himself, what can I do? It's an interesting thought right here, because when we get to the point to where our head becomes an echo chamber, that we talk to ourselves about ourselves and come up with a conclusion that is good and unanimous on why we should do what it is that our flesh tells us to do. It's interesting that this isn't the time when we normally consult with God. Oh, no. We're not going to consult with God at this time right here. Oh, no, because we've got a bigger agenda right here that says that now that God has blessed me, now that I have prayed, now that I have sought God, and God has shown me how to gather wealth, I no longer need to pray. But when I didn't have a pit to hiss in, a pot to boil water in, God and I, we were intimate and we were consistently seeking God. But now, when our child was sick, we sought the counsel of God. When our marriage was jacked up, we sought the counsel of God. When we had the unscrupulous boss at work, we sought the counsel of God. When our car broke down and we were behind on our bill and we lost our job, we sought the counsel of God. But now that prosperity has come, now that a time of plenty has come, we really don't need a coach anymore. We really don't need consulting anymore. We really don't need a God. In other words, God, I have it from here. In verse 17, the rich man says, I know what I'm going to do. I have built barns already to make sure that I had what I needed. And those barns are full. But God has blessed me with more. It's interesting that when God blessed him with more, that he spoke to his soul, his mind, his will, and his emotions. He turned to himself and he said, I will tear down the barns that I have, that God has allowed me to get everything that I need for my life, and I will build bigger barns. But I'm going to be good because I'm going to give the interest away, the overflow away. In other words, like the freezer, I'm going to rotate the old out and give it away and keep putting the new in for myself. Verse 19, and I will say to my soul, I'll tell my mind the way that I'm processing things. I will tell my emotions the way that I feel about things. I will tell my will or volition the way that I decide to do things, that this is the best thing to do, and that we are going to be good for many years. So now, not that I have enough, now, not that I have more than enough, now that God has opened up and I have exceedingly abundantly above all that I could ask for, all that I need, all that I ever thought that I would have when I finished high school. Now I can relax and eat and drink and be merry. Now I will not have to rely upon God. Now I will not have to pray like I used to pray. Now I will not have to live a life of faith in God for my next meal. I will not have to trust God that I'm going to be okay, that my family's going to be okay, for I have all that I need and some. You see, the sin against God is not having the stuff, but the sin that every man since Adam has created against God is that we turn away from God to pursue what we want. That God's counsel becomes not an edict from a Lord, not a course of action set by a general, not a play called by the head coach, but it becomes a suggestion, a point for consideration. Could you imagine going to the Alabama football game and Nick Saban is there, and Nick Saban has a play that is sent in and he gives a thumb up and the play goes in, and the quarterback, when he gets there, when he gets to play, he says, yes, I know what the coach said to call, and I have considered it. However, I think since I'm the one out here playing the game for real, that I know what's better than what the coach knows. I think I'm going to call something else. And so Bryce Young, that quarterback, makes the decision that I'm going to call an audible. I know that the coach called this, but I'm going to call that. The problem is that he's making a game decision in a temporary situation because there's a game plan and not just a situation plan. And he calls that play. And the coach called the play that he called because he sits high, but he looks low. In fact, the coach and the council, they sit high and they look low, and they are seeing things that the quarterback can't see because he's blinded by the big linemen. They see the defensive backs creeping up. They see that a blitz is coming, but the quarterback can't see it because he doesn't have the advantage of being able to look high and to look low. God is saying to this man, thou fool, not only because you built bigger barns, not only because you said I can eat, drink, and be merry and not have to trust anything and anybody, but thou fool, because you're taking a short-term situation, a short-term view, and applying it to a long-term situation. And he says to him, thou fool, tonight you're about to be sacked because a blitz is coming. Today your soul's going to be required of you. We admire men and women who do great things. We admired Martin Luther King Jr. for the work of his life. Others admired Billy Graham for the work of his life. And oh yes, that's good over there in the faith community. Mother Teresa for caring for the orphans in Calcutta and giving a life. We admired them. But there are many of us in the back of our minds, we admire the people that are successful, the people that stack up tens of millions and billions of dollars. Those are the ones that we really admire. I want to reflect for a moment upon a life as we anticipate iPhone 25 coming out, whatever it is, right? It's something. Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs had acquired and done a lot of things. But he had not planned for the end. Our life is more than the stages of we were born into this family, we experienced this struggle, we had this opportunity, we had this setback, and then we had this success, and then we had eternity. All of that from the time that we are born or born again is a part of a larger snapshot. Steve Jobs had an interesting life. Steve Jobs was born into a family that was poor. Steve Jobs, talked about that he had dropped out of college after the first 6 months. He had a story that it wasn't his fault that he dropped out of college. It was the circumstances that he was born into. And when he was asked, why did I drop out of college? He began to think about it. My biological mother was an unwed college graduate student. And she decided to put him up for adoption. She felt very strongly that if he was adopted by college graduates, that he would be okay. She didn't put any faith in a God or anything, but she put faith in a system that if somebody has a degree, that they're going to be okay. except that when he was born, they decided at the last minute, these college graduates, that they wanted a girl instead of a boy. So now his mother was desperate. And so what happens, the people that finally adopted him that were on the waiting list, his mother found out later that they had never graduated from college. And in fact, that the man that adopted him had never even graduated from high school. And that he came into an environment like that, and she refused to sign the adoption paper, but after a while, because she had no vision beyond bringing the baby forth and giving him away, she relented. Well, parents promised that he would one day go to college, and at 17 years later, he did go to college, but after 6 months, he didn't have the value of college. See, it's not enough to be exposed to a situation, those values that say that this has value and this is how you can use it. He didn't have it. So he dropped out, and here he began to spend all the money his parents had saved their entire life to send him to college. So he rolled the dice. I'll drop out and we'll see what happens. He dropped out of college, but he did like Scoochie did. He hung around there for another year and a half and said he could make money hustling. But one of the things that he did not do was, although he had dropped out, he had decided that his life would not become a monument to a past failure. If you're ever going to have a life that's worth living, it cannot become a monument of a past failure, but instead it should be a testament of a faithful God who says a righteous man falls 7 times and every time he gets up. But all too often, the internet is filled with people sharing their testimonies of failure as opposed to the story and testimony of the resiliency of a God who has a plan and a destiny for their lives. It's like Les Brown, at some point in Les Brown's life, the one that was academically uneducable. It's not over until I win. But 10 years later, Steve Jobs, he's designing the first Macintosh computer. The first Mac. It was beautiful. He designed it in his parents' garage. He had done that. 10 years later, he was now worth $2 billion. 4,000 employees. He was a success. But sometimes in life, the only thing that requires a shift for you, an earthquake, a catastrophic event, is not always death. After he had built the company, he was fired. The company that he had built, he had just released the Macintosh, turned 30, and he got fired from a company that he started. Apple continued to grow and they hired some of the most talented people. But at 30 years old, he was out of work. You see, a life that is worth living, it is marked by setbacks. A life that is worth living, it expires the catastrophes of life. You have the house fire, you have the tornado, you have the loss of a loved one, you have that. And every now and then, everything that you have been working on for your whole adult life, whenever you started from 20 to 30 to 40, sometimes it will all come crumbling down. You have an opportunity to believe that you have a life that is worth living, that God put you here for a purpose, on purpose. And when we realize that, we have to have an obligation to discover why we are here. Why were we born? Why am I in this family? Why am I in this nation? Why am I in Birmingham, Alabama? Why am I an African-American man in Birmingham, Alabama, that was once known as the most racist city in the world? The segregation capital of America. Why, God, did you bring me here? And if I don't know that, if I don't understand, if I don't pursue the knowing of that, then my life will become a monument, not only to a past failure, but to the history of the environment in which I find myself in. Steve Jobs could have quit. He could have said, I was married, I was born into a single mom and she gave me away and she tried to put me in a household, but that household wasn't what they thought it was going to be. And here I am, and I've dropped out of college, and so I have a reason for failure. I started a company and I did this. I started a family. I started a church. I started a business, and the business started doing well. And then here comes life again, and life hits me. And again, I have another good reason for failure. Steve Jobs says, I really didn't know what to do for a few months. I felt that I had let the previous generation of entrepreneurs down, that I had dropped the baton as it was being passed to me. How could I have made such a big mistake? But then there's that something that says, I cannot quit here. I must keep going. A life that is worth living is one that is marked by resiliency. I will get up. I will go forward. My life will not become a monument to a past failure. My relationship will not become a monument to a past failure. Sometimes we have to be like Joseph, who's wrestling with the angel, and Joseph, before his name was changed, Joseph, before he became something or someone different, before his name was changed to Israel, a man that God could use, he was wrestling all night with this angel and said, I'm not going to let you go until you bless me. Sometimes you got to wrestle with a relationship until it blesses you. Sometimes you got to wrestle with a marriage until it blesses you. Sometimes you got to wrestle with the tensions between a father and a son until it blesses you, a mother and a daughter until it blesses you. Sometimes you've got to wrestle with a situation until it blesses you. So at this point, he's wrestling, not knowing what to do. It's okay not to know what to do, but you cannot quit. A life worth living is one where you began to realize that God has a plan and a purpose for my life, for good and not for evil, to prosper me to an expected end. Nobody gets married in order to get divorced. Nobody starts a family in order to quit. and abandon a child. Nobody starts a company with dreams of one day losing it, being fired. At some point, Steve Jobs said he had to find what it was that he loved, what it was that he was passionate about. He began to look at his gifts, his talents, and abilities. He lacked the character that he needed, the emotional maturity that he needed to operate at a level where his gifts could carry him. Some of us have come through life and we hit 30, 40, 50, and we have crashed and burned because our gifts carried us where our character could not keep us. And we've had a public fall. But you still got to believe that your life has a greater purpose than what you have used it for. And if God is giving you another day, then you got to make up for it. At some point, he decided that I'm going to start over. I've managed the relationships in my family bad, but I need to start over. I've managed these opportunities wrong. I need to start over. Sometimes we need to start over. Sometimes we need to clear off the whiteboard and begin again. Sometimes we need to gather our family members and sit down and erase the whiteboard of history, because we cannot define our future opportunity by our past failures. Some point, in order to live a life that's worth living, you have to erase the failures of the past, the letdowns of the past, and write out a model for what a successful future looks like. And you invite those people to go along with you if they desire. Steve Jobs said, at some point, it slowly began to dawn on me. I still loved what I did. And that my setbacks had not changed that. I can still paint, I can still write, I can still create movies, I can still speak, I can still serve, I can still build. My setbacks did not kill my love, it simply killed my ego. At Apple, he had been rejected and publicly, but he still loved what he did. And if you keep on living a life worth living, you began to discover that the setbacks oftentimes become setups, not as a rah-rah touchdown, but a setup because you can grow through them. New beginnings are not just for the young. If you are 25, if you are 35, 45, 55, 75, 85, new beginnings are not just for the young. You still have the ability to create. You still have the ability to be used by the Most High God. Sometimes when all the chess pieces are wiped off of the board, the heaviness goes away. Sometimes when the fear of jail goes away, so does the heaviness. Sometimes when the fear of your credit score getting too low goes away, so does the heaviness. Now you can live relying upon God, that He gave you everything that you had, and the same God that gave you everything that you have can give you even more. He can keep you better than Experian. He can keep you better than all the other credit bureaus. A life that is amazing and is worth living always seeks out opportunities. God, you trusted me with this experience for what? I remember one of the largest failures of my life at that time. I didn't know what to do with it. And I remember Jody Erickson taught us saying, until you can thank God for trusting you with experience, you have not gone through it. You have simply stayed there and become a monument to the past. You have to keep moving so that the scenery changes in your rearview mirror so that you can gain a broader and higher perspective. Steve Jobs was fired. But when he made up the decision to maximize his gifts, his talents and abilities that God had placed within him, when he said, there's something that's unique to me that I still love, that I'm still passionate about, that I can be the best in the world, that I'm going to use my gifts to the best of my ability. He said, I'm still alive. If you're hearing this message today, you can say it, I'm still alive. I'm still here. I'm still alive. The company's gone, but I've got my gifts. The relationships are gone, but I have my gifts, my talents and abilities, and I'm going back to get most of my mind back. Because I've given a piece of my mind to a lot of different folks. I'm getting it back. I'm calling Ollie income free. I'm getting all my mind back. After that public failure, broad embarrassment, after Steve Jobs came to that realization that I still have my gifts. He said, I still have my gifts. I still have my God. I still have every ability and talent that God has given me. I still have this mind that was created for his glory and my good. During the next 5 years, he started a company named Next, another company called Pixar, and he fell in love with an amazing woman who would become his wife. And Pixar went on to create the world's first 100% computer animated feature film called Toy Story. Nexstar was later purchased by Apple, and after Apple bought Nexstar, they rehired him. And when he returned to Apple, the technology that he had developed at Next is the heart of Apple's current renaissance. And he built a family. The side road from not being on top, the side road from not being in the spotlight, the side road for not being infamous and famous, learning how to blossom in obscurity. A life that is worth living understands the value of blossoming in obscurity. In other words, there are times when you have to draw back. There are times when there's a major shift. There's a time when you've been taken out of this situation. You were popular, you were famous, you were well known, but something happened that took you out of that spotlight. You're going to have to learn how to thrive in obscurity. When the cameras are not rolling, when the lights are not on, you've got to figure out how to use your gifts, your talents, your ability, your God-given gifts, your God-given talents and ability to thrive without the heaviness of the environment that you were in before. That's a life that's worth living. He goes back. He builds Apple up. Everybody loves it. But there's a third phase of Steve Jobs' life. and it's about death. Steve Jobs says that when he was 17 years old, he read a quote that went something like this: if you live each day as if it is your last, someday you'll most certainly be right. We all have an appointment with the end. He said that it made such an impression upon him that for the past 33 years, he is 56 now, he says, I have looked in the mirror every morning and asked myself this question: if today were the last day of my life, would I want to do what I am about to do today? See, a life that is worth living is spent day in. Each day is spent like a dollar, like a quarter, on something that has value. If you spend your money on things that is perishable, you don't value the money. If all your money is spent on things and stuff, then you're not using it to its greatest value. If each day was a dollar, how are you spending it? A life worth living understands that every day is valuable and that we have an obligation to get the greatest value out of every day that we have. We have to spend it. We can't save time. We can't make up time. We can't conserve time. All we can do is spend time. If today were the last day of your life, would you want to do what you are about to do today? And when that answer is no for too many days in the row, then that is a sign to you that it needs to change, that you are not on the path that God has for you. For I know the path that I have for you, for good and not for evil, to prosper you, to give you a hope and a future, to an expected end. He said, you got to remember that one day I'll be dead. He said it's something that helped him to crystallize the life choices as death gets closer to you, because almost everything, all external expectations, all pride, all fear, all embarrassment, or even the past failures, these things just fall away when you face death. These are the words of Steve Jobs. Leaving only what is truly important. And it's not bigger barns and bigger bank accounts. What are you spending your life in that is going to live beyond you? Remembering that you are going to die is the best way, I know, to avoid the trap of thinking that you have something to lose. You are already naked, and there is no reason not to follow your heart, to love your God, to pursue what God has given you to do. And to do that, you've got to spend time with God, so that you know that it is not your fleshly, selfish ambition. When Steve Jobs gave this particular talk, this particular speech about a year earlier, he had been diagnosed with cancer. He had had a scan that morning, and it showed a tumor was on his pancreas. And the doctors told him that this was a type of cancer that is incurable and that he should go home and get his affairs in order, for he had 6 months to live. That he had to prepare to tell his kids that everything you thought that you would tell them the next 10 years, you got to tell them today. Like the man who was building the barns, and God says to him, fool your soul. In that short period of time while that he was using to build other barns and to get more, there are things that he needed to deposit within his children. A life that is worth living uses the moments that they have, the days that they have, the hours that they have to prepare the next generation. It doesn't wait. It makes sure that everything is buttoned up so that it will be as easy as possible for your family to make it without you. That the song that Papa was a Rolling Stone will not become your legacy or your epitaph. Wherever he laid his hat was his home, but when he died, all he left us was alone. If we live with that sense of mortality and that our life has a purpose and we don't know how much time we have to spend it, how many days God is giving us, we don't know, but if we spend it as the greatest way of having a life that's worth living. Later on that day, he had another biopsy, an endoscope, and they went down and got a few cells off of the tumor, and they said the good news is, well, these are his words. The doctor told him after reviewing the cells that he started crying because it turned out to be a very rare form of pancreatic cancer that is curable with surgery. He had the surgery, and at the time of giving this speech, he was fine. He said, no one wants to die. Even people who want to go to heaven don't want to die to get there. And yet death is the destination that we all share. We've got to redeem the time. If you are pouring your life out on riotous living, you got to redeem the time, because your children's destiny is tied to your assignment here on earth. Don't be trapped into a life that God did not mean for you, that does not bring life, that brings death. If it is getting all you can and canning all you got in the corporate offices in downtown Birmingham, don't waste your life. If it is hustling and bustling and slinging and clinging to all that you get, don't waste your life. There are things that your children need to hear from you, that your brothers and sisters need from you, that you are not available to do while you are hustling and bustling in life. The realization that your days are numbered should not be to get it all in, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die. But if you do not invest in others, your life is but a whisper that does not matter. What difference does your life make? What difference does your life make? That seems kind of dramatic to have the conversation, but he began to live differently. God gave him a warning. I believe God gives people warnings of things that are to come. God gave him a warning. And maybe for you today is your warning. Don't waste your life. When you live your whole life, no matter what age that is, you want to be able to hear, well done, thou good and faithful servant. Steve Jobs died sometime later. Death was imminent. His last words were not the great speech that you hear, oh, take time to plant roses and all that. Steve Jobs' sister was there at his bedside when he died. And his last words before he died was 6 words. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. My prayer is that as we prepare for those last words, that our oh wow will be, it's everything you said it was, God. Oh wow, I did not miss the opportunity to trust you, to live my life according to your purpose and your way. Oh wow, it was worth it. Oh wow, I had done all that you've given me to do. Oh wow, I had set things in place. Oh wow, I had made sure that my children and my children's children knew who you were, God. Oh wow. I'm so glad I trusted you. All of us are going to spend that moment when we make that transition from this realm that we know that is finite to the one that is infinite. And we're going to have to face our maker. My prayer is that we will have lived life well, that we will have lived a good life. Billy Graham lived a pretty good life, and at the end of his life, he said, what would you want to be on your obituary, Reverend Graham? He said, that I was faithful and that I had integrity and that I was faithful to my calling and that I loved God with all my mind, my heart, and my soul. He then added, some things in my life I would be embarrassed if anyone else saw. I would like God to edit the film. He had not lived a perfect life, and many of us have not. But we can live our life on purpose and we can live it well. I think we have an obligation to live our lives well for those that are coming behind us. Are you living your life well? I'll end with this. An excerpt from a speech from Martin Luther King Jr. You've heard it before. I'm going to let you see it. And here's what let me see if I can pull it up here for you to see. Because I think it's worth looking at. Martin Luther King Jr., as he reflected upon the brevity of life and how he had spent his life, he said, every now and then, I guess we all think realistically about the day when we will be victimized with what is life's final common denominator, that's something that we call death. We all think about it, and every now and then I think about my own death and I think about my own funeral, and I don't think about it in a morbid sense. And every now and then I ask myself what it is that I would once said and I leave the word to you this morning. If any of you are around when I have met my day, I don't want a long funeral. And if you get somebody to deliver the eulogy, tell him not to talk too long. Every now and then I wonder what I want him to say. Tell him not to mention that I have a Nobel Peace Prize that isn't important, or not to mention that I have 300 or 400 awards. That is not important. Tell him not to mention where I went to school. I'd like somebody to mention that day that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to help somebody, that he spent his life serving others. I'd like somebody to say that he tried to love somebody. I want you to say that day that I tried to be right and walk with them. I want you to be able to say that day that I did try to feed the hungry. I want you to be able to say in that day that I tried in my life to clothe the naked. I want you to say on that day that I did try in my life to visit those that were in prison. And I want you to say that I tried to love and serve humanity. Yes, if you want to say that I was a drum major, say that I was a drum major for justice. Say that I was a drum major for peace. That I was a drum major for righteousness. And all of the other shallow things will not matter. I won't have any money to leave behind, but I just want to leave a committed life behind. And that is all I want to say. If I can help somebody as I pass along, if I can cheer somebody with a well song, it's a word or a song, if I can show somebody that he's traveling wrong, then my living will not be in vain. I remember reading, he said that if I can, listening to the speech, he said, if I can love my neighbor like the master taught, if I can bring salvation to a world that's wrought, if I can do my duty as the master taught, then my living will not be in vain. A life, ultimately, that is worth living is one that is not lived in vain. Who better to tell you your purpose, your use, your reason for being than the one who made you? When I get a new car, I get a new phone, I get a new object, I don't go look at somebody else's owner's manual. I don't go and look at somebody else's manufacturing book to figure out how to use the washing machine. If it's a Maytag, I'm going to go to Maytag. If it's another brand, I'm going to go to that brand. You are God's workmanship. And if you want to know how the one that created you desired for you to live your life, stop asking others. Simply go to him. And that will put you on the pathway to a life that is worth living. Let me pray for you. Let me pray for me, my family, my friends, my covenant community. Father God, we love you so much. We thank you for loving us. When we lose our way, life becomes stale. Our zest and zeal for life becomes stagnant. Father, you said that you have given all of us gifts that are unique to us. We were wonderfully and marvelously made by you. And all of us have something to give back. Father, I pray that this would be a day that we would spend some time contemplating with you why we are here, what you have for us to do. God, free us from trying to recreate a past moment, a past high, a past idea, a past snapshot of a life that is gone by. Yesterday is gone. Tomorrow may never come, but today is a gift that comes from you. And that is why we call it a present. May we open up our present of each new day with a joy and expectations that it is everything that you wanted us to have this day. So we pray, and I pray, oh Lord, give us this day our daily bread, and it will be sufficient enough for me. And Father, I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Hey, look, thanks for being with us. A life worth living is a life that is well spent doing what the Most High God has created you to do. Love the Lord your God with all your everything, and love your neighbor as yourself. God bless you. We love you. Covenant Community Fellowship, we love you. We will see you on Tuesday evening at 6:30 p.m. for continuation of a life worth living. God bless you. Make it a great week. Spend your days on things that matter. Hold to his hand, God's unchanging hand. Hold to his hand, God's unchanging hand. Build your hopes on things eternal. Hold to God's unchanging hand. God bless. We love you. Take care.